Hi, my name's Keith Cooper from Northlight Images, and in this short video I'm going to have a look at colour fine art printing on the Epson ET-8550. The 8550 is an interesting printer because it has a mix of inks. It has dye-based inks and it has a pigment black. Now that has all kinds of knock-on effects in terms of colour profiling, suitability of papers and other things. It's capable of very good results. I've produced another video that looks specifically at black and white, and I'm going to look in this one at printing colour images using fine art papers. And by this I mean in this instance cotton rag style papers, so they're quite thick. This particular one that I'm going to start with is Epson Hot Press Bright. So it's a smooth finish paper. It has a very white finish. It has some optical brightness in it. Now I know that's an issue for some people. I use the cold press or hot press natural paper for some images where I don't want the bright white, but for the colour image I'm going to print here I do want that white. Now I've made profiles in the full review, the written review of the printer that I'll be doing in due course. I look at profiling and things like that, but in this instance I've got two, on the surface of it, fairly similar papers that I'm going to print the same image on and show the differences and why with this printer choosing the right paper for your images is really important. It makes the difference between okay type results and ones that look good. But anyway, I've loaded some of this sheet paper here. This is A3 plus 13 inch by 19 inch. I've set the paper media type here to VFA. Now that's the matte fine art setting for this printer. I'm going to print using a normal colour mode. If I was printing black and white, I'd use the ABW print mode, specific black and white print mode. But this one here is for printing colour images, and I'm using profiles that I've created. I should say that when I publish the review, there'll be a list of all the papers that I've tested, and the profiles will be available on request for non-commercial use. I'm afraid I can't distribute them commercially, but they're free for use for anyone. You just have to tell me which ones you want, but you'll have to wait for the review for that to see which papers I've covered. But anyway, to the computer. I've opened up this image, and this is a strongly coloured image. It's the Curve Theatre here in Leicester, taken not long after it's opened, with some interesting coloured spotlighting on it. This is a tricky picture to print on matte papers because it's got very strong colours. I'd normally print this perhaps on a luster, but I'm using the matte papers here to show the difference between the papers. Now I've selected velvet fine art paper, A3 plus and rear feeder. Quality standard, that is the only quality you get with this particular one. It's a high quality. You can't have a quicker, lesser quality option. Layout standard, I've just loaded the image. I'm using Epson Print Layout here, the software. The image has been loaded from Photoshop, but could be equally loaded from whatever you choose to edit your images in. Now, I'm using an ICC profile, and I've specified the 8550 HPB VFA high quality one specifically for this here, and that's the profile that I made. I've selected the perceptual rendering intent because these strong colours are almost certainly out of gamut. I could change over. It's worth checking, looking at this. There is soft proofing here, but I'm going to print this using perceptual rendering intent. So there we go, just press print. So I'm waiting for the data to come over. It's coming from my oldish Mac laptop. It's on our wireless network, and that's going to come through here. You can hear the printer making some clunking noises. It says printing. We'll get the tray come out here. Extends a bit because it knows I've set the page size for A3 plus 13 inches by 19 inches. So this is the largest sheet size that this particular printer takes. Now with heavier papers like this, It does feed okay, but be prepared occasionally for some slightly stiffer papers, maybe not to feed immediately, and you just need to touch them lightly on the top here and below. You don't need to push them in, just enough to give an extra bit of feed pressure to it. But anyway, here comes the print, and it's now printing. It's not super fast, but I'm printing for quality here. If I want quick prints, I can put photo paper in, maybe in the tray underneath or at the back here, and it'll whiz through them pretty quickly. So if you're just looking for printing just ordinary snapshots, no problem at all. It is much faster than this. But this, I'm specifically looking at what's generally referred to as fine art. Now, I don't, and I freely admit this, I don't actually know what fine art printing really means, but it's a term that lots of people use, and it's probably one that helps when you're trying to sell prints. Well, here comes the leading edge of the print, and seems to be printing okay. Well, the print's coming out nice and sharp, but it has some really nice delicate colours in it, but it doesn't have the intensity that I can see on the screen. Now that's not necessarily a surprise, because what you see on the screen is never what you get come out of a printer. Part of the art of learning to print well is to know the differences between what you see on the screen and what comes out of the printer, and being able to allow for it, because sometimes the best looking image on the screen does not equate with the best looking images print. That only comes from experience making test prints. It's why I always do test prints after I'm setting up a new printer and have a new paper to try. I use standardized test prints for that, but I've covered that elsewhere. We're just looking at the comparison between two superficially similar papers. In some ways, the delicate blues that I can see on this print here, and they're just not really going to be very visible on a video, I'm afraid, more reflect how it probably looked when I was there. There wasn't the intensity of colour that you see in the images. This picture was perhaps a second or two exposure. It's using a 17mm shift lens to get the particular perspective for the shot, but it's a print I've used, or I should say an image I've used a lot as an example of the kind of sort of architectural work I do, particularly handling lighting. It looks great on the web, one reason I use it, and the other reason I normally print it on a glossy bright paper, and the reason for that is because bright glossy colours grab people's attention. They may not necessarily be accurate, however, but we'll print this, then I'll print it on the other paper and we'll see what the differences are. Here's the other paper I'm going to use, slightly thinner. This is a smooth fine art paper. It's a Hahnemuhle paper, 265 grams, so a little lighter than many, certainly lighter than this one here. But if you put the two next to each other, the Hot Press Bright here is slightly brighter than this one, but there's not a lot of difference between it. So we wouldn't normally expect a great deal of difference between the images. Now there's the print as made using the Bright paper there, and the paper size and everything has been remembered from last time. It's paper size A3, paper type, velvet fine art. This is a consumer printer. That means that there is a relatively limited range of media types. Certainly, if you looked at something like the P700, P900, you'll find far more media types. You'll find far more support for custom profiling. It makes a difference. Now, I say Epson are potentially missing something here. Now, I know the market that this printer is aimed at probably wouldn't know an ICC profile if it fell on them. However, there are a significant number of people, photographers, who want to produce decent quality prints, like the idea of the ink tanks here, and want to see how this printer does. And I think it can do very well. In fact, I've got plenty of examples, but let's just print this second picture. Now, all the settings here are exactly the same as before. In fact, the only thing I've changed is the profile. It's gone from the profile for the Hot Press Bright colour paper to the Smooth Fine Art 265. So I've changed that and I'll print. I'm now waiting for the data to come across for the image. It's being printed from a file. I believe this one works out at about 300 pixels per inch resolution. Perfectly good enough for a print this size. I'll happily print at higher. I have printed at lower. It all depends what you're printing. Now, larger prints, you can get away with a slightly lower resolution because people tend not to look at the prints so closely. What I would always say for you, if you're someone who sells prints, anyone who goes up to one of your prints and looks at it from about this distance is never going to buy one. It's only other photographers who do that. That should tell you something important if you're intending to sell your prints. But I've done lots of videos about the business side of photography, in particular selling prints. So if you are interested in that, do have a look through the videos in the playlist that's concerned with the business of photography. Quite a lot of stuff about, you know, how to sell prints, what sort of prints sell, and who buys them, which is the key bit of information you need. But anyway, this is going through, and we shall see in a moment the two prints. Now, it's at this point I look at this picture and think, this doesn't look right. It's too washed out. And this is where I realise I put the paper in the wrong way round. Now, with the box that I took this out of, it says print side up. The box I took this paper out of, I'd not marked on which way it was in. And using the slightly damp finger test, there's no tackiness there. And there's a tacky feel on the underneath. So I put the paper in the wrong way. Now, fortunately, I've got quite a few boxes of this paper. Always worth checking before you make a print. So let's have another go at making this print, because this was not looking right. Now I know why. There's the paper loading, hopefully for a somewhat better looking print. This is why I always say do a lot of testing with a new printer. And if you've not got boxes of paper sitting about, do your testing with a cheap, small paper to get it right. You don't really want to be wasting sheets of paper that large. Let's see what the difference is though. We've now got our third print underway, and hopefully this one will make a better comparison with the first one. Here comes the print on the right side of the paper, and I can immediately see the colour is much more intense, and looking at the area where on the other one I'd lost detail, I can see detail. Now, I've used the perceptual rendering intent on both these prints, and the choice between perceptual rendering intent and relative colorimetric, which is the options you get with the Epson print layout software, really does depend on the image. Perceptual takes colours, bright colours that may be out of gamut or beyond the range of a particular paper ink printer combination, and squeezes them to fit them into what the printer can manage. Relative colorimetric chops off those brighter colours and prints them as best it can. The difference is quite subtle in many images, but it's always worthwhile checking when you're printing a new image on a paper you're not that familiar with, using soft proofing to get an idea of the difference between using perceptual and relative colorimetric rendering intents. Some images it may not make a difference, others it does. I would just say that on matte papers, if you see an option for black point correction, select that. It helps allow for various aspects of when profiles are made, and it gives better blacks, but it doesn't crunch them up. We shall see in a moment. But yeah, this looks rather more like the picture I'm seeing on the screen. Remember though, as I've said, you will never get a match between what appears on the screen and what comes out here. The print is always the result. The image on the screen is an intermediate step, unless of course you're producing images for web use or something like that. But always remember that this print will never match what's on the screen, and in many ways it's learning to appreciate those differences and having an understanding of them that gives your printing just that little bit more of an edge. Soft proofing can help, but don't rely on it for every single image. Get to trust your feelings as to how pictures will look. It's a very important stage because it helps you think about the print as the final result you're after, not the image on the screen. I've written loads of articles and done a few videos about the problems that people get. Why are my prints wrong? Why are my prints too dark? All kinds of things like that. It often comes down to screen related matters. Either the screen's too bright, so you tend to get dark prints, or the screen colour just doesn't match, you need to profile. But anyway, I've done lots of stuff about this and why printing is such an important thing to help your photography. If you get the chance to print your images and you get into it, it really can affect every single aspect of your photography. It really can help. But this image is looking much better. I will admit when the first one, the second one on the wrong side of the paper came out, I was seriously wondering what I'd got wrong, because I couldn't think I'd got any settings wrong. I'd done something wrong, and it turns out to be something as obvious as putting in the paper the wrong way around. So, just goes to show, even with lots of experience of doing printing for years, I can still mess things up as well. The nice thing is, compared to the print on the wrong side, I can see detail in these strong colours, and the colours are richer, the black is blacker, as I expected. But you should always be prepared to be surprised when you're testing a new printer. And if there's one thing I've learned about using this printer, is that the mixture of inks means that for prints like this, and black and white, it does not behave, certainly on papers like this, it does not behave like a pigment ink printer. It doesn't behave like a dye-based printer. It is a mixture of the two, and that means that finding the right paper for a printer like this is important. So if you're coming to this printer from another printer that you've used, don't assume that your choices before as to the best paper are actually true. And likewise, if somebody tells you that a particular make of paper or brand of paper is absolutely superb, unless they've tried it on this printer, take what they say with a big pinch of salt. Test it and have a look for yourself. It's worthwhile for the difference you'll find. Right, here we have the print. I'll show, first of all, the difference that you get between a print on the correct side of the paper and a print on the wrong side of the paper. Hopefully that's visible in the video here. Suffice to say, the print here on the wrong side looks pretty washed out. There's lack of detail, all kinds of things. It's wrong. But it's not glaringly wrong. And that's the important bit. So if you're using paper like this, unless the box actually says printing side up or something like that, do check your printing on the right side of the paper. But we'll just put that one away as an example. And now have a look at the two pictures that have been printed. One using the cold press natural, one using the smooth fine art paper. Now here they are. Now I'm hoping that will show up okay on the video. I will take a photograph of these two and I will insert it into the video so that you can get a clearer idea of the differences of what I'm talking about here, because it is quite important. What I can say is that on the Hahnemuhle paper, this fine art paper, this one has intense deep blues. There's not that much detail because of the strong colour. The reds are very bright. This one is a much more subtle version. There's nothing wrong with this. It has lots of detail, it has colour in it. Colour is not such a strong element of the picture. In this one, it looks far more like if I printed it on a luster paper. It's not quite there because it doesn't have the intensity that you'd get from the shiny surface of a luster or gloss paper, but the two are very different. Now, which one do I like the best? Well, it depends. I'm quite liking this one here because of the fine detail and delicate colour. But then this one is possibly will appeal to more people because of the bright colours in it. There's the differences in it. So, what am I to learn from this? Well, two superficially similar papers give very different results. And I picked this image to try and exacerbate the differences between them to show it. For black and white, the 265 gram paper, the more colourful one here, that's the Hahnemuhle one, it is awful for black and white. The blacks are crunched up. This is using the ABW print mode. It really doesn't take kindly to that. However, the gamut of this paper is much larger than the gamut of the Hot Press Bright paper. Would be similar for the other versions of this as well that Epson do. So if I was printing black and white, the best results are on this paper. If I'm printing colour, depending on the image, I'm going to say there's a fair chance the best results come on this paper. Now, depends what you want and how you're going to print. This doesn't come as that much of a surprise to me, fortunately, which is why I was concerned when I printed the wrong side of the paper on here, because here are the profiling charts that I use for making the colour profiles for these papers. And in looking at them, I don't normally expect to see much of a difference. But if I put the two next to each other, and I'll inset a picture of this as well, so that hopefully you can see it even on the video, the intensity of colour is much greater on the 265 gram paper than it is the heavy hot press paper. So there you have it. There's nothing wrong with either of them. There's no best in it. I will rarely ever say something is the best solution because the answer is almost always it depends. So it depends very much on your image. But it does mean that if you're going to be printing on fine art papers on this particular printer, you need profiles for their paper. And ideally, if you can't get custom profiles, you need to get your paper from a supplier that produces profiles for this printer, because the 8550 is an excellent printer, but it is different to other printers because of the mixed ink set. Just something to take out. Hopefully that's of interest in printing. Do have a look at the black and white version of this I've done, looking at different types of paper, because that shows the opposite result. As I said, I will have the detailed review in due course of this printer covering all different aspects of it and things like that. But I'm going to be producing a few more of these videos just covering specific areas that people might be interested in doing printing for it. But enjoy your printing. Hopefully, if these are of interest, please subscribe to the channel. Please tell other people about the channel and feel free to ask questions. Thank you.